Edgar Allan Poe
by Isabella Angodia
and Aretha Campbell.
Introduction.
Edgar Allan Poe was an American literary critic, writer, poet, and editor born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1809. Although he started writing in 1827, his work did not make an impact until much later. Today, he is known as one of the most important writers in history, most popular for his horrific, macabre stories and romanticism. Poe had also overcome a lot of obstacles in his life, such as depression, alcoholism, hate, and scorn from other people, death of loved ones, and job and financial struggles, which show us that no matter how dire the circumstances, we can still persevere and create or become something amazing. Poe's life.
Edgar Allan Poe, born in 1809, wasn't even 3 years old when life started going downhill. Both his parents died before he was 3, and he was separated from his siblings Henry and Rosalie. In 1812, he was taken in and fostered by a married couple, John Allan and Fanny Allan. Growing up, Poe excelled both academically and physically. He was quite popular with the other children, too. In 1816, at age 17, he was enrolled in the University of Virginia. Eventually, Poe had to leave as he could no longer afford to go there. Poe soon found a job in the army and quickly rose in the ranks. In 1827, Poe published his first book. In 1829, he published his second book called Alaraf, Tamerlane, and Minor Poems. Soon, with a little pity money from his foster father, he enrolled in a different college through the army, Military Academy at West Point. But Poe found he didn't like it there and soon left. After leaving, he moved in with his Aunt Maria Poe and cousin Virginia Eliza Clem. He later married Virginia in 1836 and moved the family upstate to Philadelphia, where they lived for about 6 years until Virginia's death in 1847. Heartbroken, Poe died soon after, though no one knows why. While returning to New York, he was supposed to board a ferry from Richmond, Virginia, then continue through Baltimore, Maryland, and then New York. But for unknown reasons, he stopped in Baltimore on September 28th and was found drunken and half-conscious outside a tavern on October 3rd. He was found in bad shape and unresponsive. Most mysterious of all, he was wearing someone else's clothes. A cheap, ill-fitting suit and a straw hat, contrary to his usual black wool suit. He died the early morning of October 7th, 4 days later, in the hospital. Doctors say he likely died of rabies. "Lord, help my poor soul," were the last words he uttered before death took him. Poe's works and their importance.
Poe's most famous poem was a lyrical narrative poem called The Raven. The raven was described by someone as despair brooding over wisdom, and another said it fills the air with wild and delightful music. It was extremely popular and helped solidify his legacy as one of America's literary giants. Poe is now arguably the greatest American short story writer in all of history. He created the detective genre of writing when he wrote The Murders in the Rue Morgue. This book inspired many authors to create stories and characters that are famous today, such as Sherlock Holmes and Nancy Drew. Without Poe, they would have never existed. He even inspired films such as Guy de Maupassant's The Hand and Edward Lucas White's The House of Nightmare. After a short stint in the army, Poe self-published a book entitled Tamerlane and Other Poems. It was to be the start of a brilliant career. Many events in Poe's life likely served as his inspiration for his macabre tales of horror. Despite his horrible luck and tragic beginning to his life, he managed to persevere. Poe's works as an editor, poet, and critic had a profound impact on American and international literature. His stories mark him as one of the originators of both horror and detective fiction. Many anthologies credit him as the architect of the modern short story. He was also one of the first critics to focus primarily on the effect of style and structure in a literary work. Impacts today. Edgar Allan Poe is one of the most important writers in American history. He is most remembered for chilling stories that still terrify readers today, more than 165 years after his death. His work has influenced writers, artists, and even movie directors. It's amazing how over a century after Poe died, people remember him and celebrate his words and his works that inspired so many people. Writers, artists, and even movie directors were inspired by Poe's works and his words. He changed perspectives and changed lives. Nearly 45 years after Poe's death, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle popularized a detective story when he created Sherlock Holmes, a character with peculiarities similar to Poe's Dupin. Poe's style of writing detective fiction structured it today. One feature of detective fiction he established was making clues available or obvious throughout the story, so the reader has a chance to try to solve the case too. All in all, it was a very interactive genre of writing and an amazing addition to the world of literature.
Poe's woman problems. Where to begin with all the struggles and challenges Poe faced? A good place to start is with woman. Although Poe is known for officiating in the genre of romanticism and having a great appreciation for women, almost every encounter he's had with a woman has ended in tragedy. The first woman in his life was his mother, and she died of tuberculosis before he was 3 years old. Then there was his friend's mom, Jane Stith Stannard, who he loved because she was very kind to him and loved him like her own son. Sadly, she also died of tuberculosis. Poe was heartbroken and wrote the poem To Helen about her. Then there was Elmira Royster, who Poe had known since childhood. They had a secret relationship because Elmira's parents did not approve of Edgar, as they believed he would not be able to support Elmira as a poet. Eventually, they found out that Edgar and Elmira had been secretly dating. They forced her to cut off all ties with Edgar and marry another man. This broke Edgar's heart. While in the army, Poe got word of his foster mother, Fanny Allan's death. He rushed back to his foster parents' home, but it was too late. He arrived a day after the funeral and wasn't even given the chance to say a proper goodbye. Fanny Allan died of tuberculosis, just like his mother. Then there was his wife, Virginia, who he loved most of all. She died of tuberculosis in 1847. Edgar was crushed and fell even deeper into alcoholism and depression. Then, what happened after Virginia's death was shocking. A photobiography of Edgar Allan Poe, by Karen E. Lange, says Poe's emotions at the time, as revealed in his letters, were extremely confused. He relied on her companionship and the knowledge of her affection to keep himself going. Poe was longing for a different love, in confusion to a great degree, which inspired him to stay alive, having attempted suicide and being an alcoholic. Sadly, he still died in 1849 for reasons unknown, although one doctor says a possible cause of death may have been tuberculosis.
Poe's challenges and struggles. Poe went through a lot in his life, and there were many obstacles and challenges he faced, such as alcoholism and depression. Poe grappled with these all his life, and alcoholism is believed to be one of the causes for his mysterious death. Depression is extremely hard to get rid of, and it seems that throughout his life, Poe only fell deeper into it. After Virginia died, Edgar met his high school sweetheart, Sarah H. Whitman, and asked to have her hand in marriage because he wanted to fix his broken heart. Sarah agreed, but on one condition: he would stop drinking permanently, so he did on August 27, 1849. It was Monday evening when he was initiated into the Shockoe Hill Division of the Sons of Temperance, sworn in by William J. Glenn. This didn't last long because 2 months later he was found drunken and unresponsive outside a tavern. Poe also had many job and financial struggles throughout his life. Poe became a soldier in the U.S. Army when he was just 18. Next, he began to sell short stories in magazines. Then, in 1835, over the next 10 years, he edited many literary journals, such as the Southern Literary Messenger, Gentleman's Magazine, Graham's Magazine, and the Broadway Journal. During these years, he established himself as a poet, a short story writer, and an editor. He also published some of his best and most famous stories and poems, such as The Fall of the House of Usher, The Telltale Heart, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, and The Raven. Lastly, he set out for an editing job in Philadelphia, and he never made it there, and he was found in bad condition in Baltimore and died 4 days later. One of the biggest challenges Poe faced was hate and scorn from other people, such as Rufus W. Griswold, who held a grudge against Poe even after his death. When they met, Poe was a respected and influential critic, and when Poe read Griswold's work, he gave a harsh yet truthful review. Griswold and Poe had many literary battles and gave harsh comments of each other's works. At one point, they were both romantically attracted to the same person. After Poe's death, Griswold wrote him a not-so-nice obituary, passing him off as insane and deserving of his death. This greatly influenced the public to feel the same, as they gave many bad reviews of his work, and public opinion greatly impacted his career as a writer. One of Poe's last books before he died, Eureka, was described as unreadable lunacy and a damnable heresy. Despite all the hate and insults it received, Poe himself believed it to be his greatest achievement. He shows us that if you love something, you should not care about how other people perceive it.
Conclusion. As you can see, Edgar Allan Poe accomplished a lot in his short 40 years of life. His tale is a tale ending in mystery and tragedy, much like all the others he has written throughout his life. Poe went through a lot, from the death of his parents, to the death of his wife, to the death of himself. Through death and heartbreak, Poe still persevered, jumping from job to job, loved one to loved one. Although he never gave up hope and never stopped trying to survive. He also never stopped pursuing the thing he loved most, writing. Since he was a young boy, Poe loved stories and poems and writing in general. That's the amazing thing about Poe. He never stopped writing, even though many things got in the way of his dream. Poe shows us that no matter what, no matter the obstacles in our path, we should never give up hope and never stop doing what we love.